Front-end development is the art of using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript to create visually appealing interfaces for a website. In a front-end development, the focus is on the client side of web development, with the primary goal of creating responsive, interactive, and a nice-looking website. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are the languages commonly used in a front-end development, while technically, HTML and CSS are not considered as a programming languages. Each has its own syntax and methodology of writing a code. HTML has its own method of writing a code, CSS has its own method of writing a code, and JavaScript has its own method of writing a code. JavaScript is a programming language that shares many similarities with other languages like PHP, C++, and C#, all of which are derived from the foundation of programming languages, the C language. While there are differences, each language builds on the same fundamentals and approaches them in its unique way. For now, let's focus on HTML and CSS before diving into JavaScript. When we're building a website interface, we typically start coding it from up to down using a series of elements. These elements describe the structure of the website that we are building, and here we are talking about HTML. HTML elements are the components that describe our website structure. An HTML page. Sometimes you can understand the meaning of this element from its name without overthinking. The heading element is one of the most commonly used HTML elements, and we see headings everywhere, from books to newspaper, and even in your graduation project report that you can feel like they will never end. It's in everything. However, how do you display a heading on your own website? As I previously mentioned, HTML and CSS have their own unique ways of writing a code. In HTML, we use two tags, an opening tag and a closing tag. The closing tag is denoted by a slash inside it. Then we set the element itself inside the two tags. In our case, it's heading. We use the H character followed by a number to indicate the size of the heading. The number ranges from 1 to 6, with the higher number representing a smaller header size. A heading is from 1 to 6, the higher number, the smaller header size. After defining the heading element using an opening and a closing tag, we insert the content that we want to display on the website between the two tags. It's important to keep the content clear and straightforward, especially for a heading. Well, to do that first, we need a development environment software, and I highly recommended Visual Studio Code from Microsoft. And after we downloaded Visual Studio, we go to the file, new file, and then we press Ctrl+C to save the file. And then we give the file a name. I'm going to name it first.html, which is the format of this file. I have an HTML file where I will be writing my HTML code. Then we'll press the exclamation mark. I know it looks weird, but for now, let's just focus on the body element, because the whole story takes place here. Inside the body element, I set 6 headings, each with a different size ranging from 1 to 6. To view the result in our code, we need to open the HTML file that we created earlier in the web browser. Let's see. Wait, I need to organize my desktop. I'm gonna put all of you in a safe place for a temporary period of time. Anyways, when I open the HTML file, this is the result of the code I wrote before, displayed in the body of the page. The body came out with a white color. Okay, now that we have covered headings, let's back in time a little bit. Let's go back to the start. One of the initial stages of web development, before we start coding, many developers begin their work by creating a wireframe. Most of the time, people make a wireframe as a sketch on paper. It gives a good perspective and a good vision on how the website looks like, and it gives the viewer a better understanding of its blueprint. In animation, for example, the frames are not typically drawn directly. Instead, a process is followed to ensure accuracy and to make the animation easier to draw. This may take more time, but the end result is much better looking animation. Similarity, when designing a website, it's much easier to fix the wireframe rather than the code. That's why it's recommended to edit the design and the wireframe directly rather than editing it in the code. This approach can save a lot of time and effort in the long run. To be honest, when we talk about designing, I used to no wireframe, no Figma, nothing. I will just jump straight into coding and rely on my imagination to create interfaces. Although my design were not terrible, it's really whenever I bought them for me. But people don't appreciate art after all. I also draw frames directly without any process. Anyways, look at this interface. I've added orange borders color so we can easily notice two important things. The first thing is, this interface is made up of several boxes that contains other elements. The first box contains search bar and search button. The second box contains an image with a button. The third box contains 4 icons. Well, this is the idea of div element. Div works as a container, or they act as a vessel that helps to organize and structure the content within a web page. You can imagine it as a box element that contains other HTML elements. It's not necessarily a box. Its appearance can be customized by manipulating the borders and applying a different styles to make a shape you want to. The div acts as a parent element with other elements inside of it, related to as a child element. Understanding the concept of divs make the process of building websites much easier. And trust me, this processor came out from unprofessional web developer. I know exactly what I'm talking about. The second thing you will notice, and perhaps the most important thing, is now, I set the 3 divs. Each of these divs contains a heading with different sentences that I saved, but there are no borders around the heading. The borders are missing. They are not appearing. That's because we need to style it using CSS. CSS is one of the languages we will use in the front-end development. We use CSS to style the HTML element. Everything related to the beauty of the website is on CSS. As I explained before, the HTML method, I will discuss the CSS method of styling our HTML element. There are many ways to style the divs we created earlier. One of these ways is to type the style tag and all the magic happen inside them. We want to style div, then we type div, 2 curly brackets, and inside these brackets we type the CSS properties, border, then column, then we choose the color we want to, then solid to make it appear. And now our div element appears on the screen. We style the div element, the parent element that contains the child element, which is the heading, and we gave it a nice looking orange border. So what if I want to change the height? Easy! All you need to do is go into the style tag and we type height, then colon, then the size of the height. I will give it a 250 pixel. Then we type semicolon, and with that we have changed the height of all the divs. But I do not want all of them to change. I just want only the second one to change. That's all. The 3 divs had the same properties, and we want to give each div its own properties, right? Before we talk about how to give each div its own properties, we need to talk about HTML attributes. HTML attributes are always set on the opening tag of the element, defining additional characteristics. For example, the href attribute. The href attribute specifies the URL of the page or the link it goes to. For example, I have 2 HTML pages and I want to go from page 1 to page 2 with 1 click. I want to create a link from page 1 to page 2. We use the anchor tag to create hyperlinks with the attributes href, with the attribute with the attributes href included within the opening tag. It specifies the URL of the destination page. Inside the href attribute, we type the name of the page we want to go. When I click on the link, the page 2 will be displayed on the screen. Inside YouTube search bar, there is the word search inside the input. To do that, we set inside the input element the placeholder attribute, then 2 quotation marks. Inside the quotation mark, we will type the word search. So what do you want the user to insert into your input? A name, a password, an email, or a checkbox. We can do that with the attribute type within the opening tag. We use image tag to insert image to our page within the opening tag of the image element. We included the source attribute that specifies the path of the image, whether the image is hosted on the internet or saved in our computer. By the way, as you can tell, there are HTML elements that do not have a closing tag. The name of these elements is the void element. They do not require a closing tag. There are 3 different ways to style an HTML element with CSS: inline CSS, internal CSS, and external CSS. In line CSS with the style attribute, we type style as always in the opening tag and we edit our styles. Internal CSS, the same way we used before using a style element. Moreover, the external CSS, the idea is to separate HTML and CSS. We can style HTML element from separated CSS page and we link them together using a link element. The link element also has an href attribute with the name of the CSS page that we want to link it with our HTML page. By separating the HTML and CSS code, we can code the HTML within the HTML page and the CSS within the CSS page. It is recommended to consistently use external CSS instead of internal CSS because the code can be distracting. Separating them is a better approach. Sometimes even when they are separated, it can still be distracting. And besides, the code looks better when it consists with the fewer lines. So, the moment you have been waiting for. Oh yeah, how can I style a specific element? There are actually two ways. We can use the class attribute or the ID attribute. Let us start with the ID. We have 3 divs and I want only to style the middle one. All I need to do is giving the second div an ID attribute with the name. I will name it second. Then, instead of typing div in the CSS, we're gonna type hash then the ID name, which is second, and that's the result. When we set div directly in the CSS, you generalize all the divs, but you do not specify. With the ID attribute, you can only style a unique element. That's why people prefer using class attribute. You can use it to style one or more than one element. For example, I want to style the first and the last divs. I will give them a class attribute with the name container, and then in CSS we type dot, then the name, which is container. I'm going to change the background color this time to the orange color, and that's the result. With classes, we type dot, then the name of our HTML attributes that we define it in the opening tag of our HTML element. And with the ID, we type a hash, then the name of our ID attribute that we define it in the opening tag of our HTML element. The class, the ID, the element itself inside the CSS, we call them with the name selectors. They are the patterns we use to select element that we want to style. Look at our page. You can notice that there is a space on the top and the side of the page. To fix that, we type the selector with the name of the universal selector. And inside of it, we type the properties padding equal to 0 and margin equal to 0. And it fixed. But what have I done? The universal CSS selector is a selector that targets all the elements in the HTML with the same style. So we are giving all the elements a margin with a value equal to 0 and the padding with a value equal to 0. And look, I'm going to talk about padding and margin in only one use in this video, which is what would happen if I edit padding and margin in the parent element. This is the general idea of the video, the parent element and the child element. Inshallah, I will talk about padding and margin with their details in a separate video. Okay, let's forget about this example. I gave each div a class attributes with the different names, okay? If I give the first container a padding with a value equal to 100 pixels, you can tell that the headings moved a little bit. That's because padding creates spacing inside the element between its content and its boundaries with 100 pixels on the top, on the right, on the bottom, and the left. We can create space on each side individually. For example, I want to create space only on the left side. We type padding left equal to 500 pixels, for example. Would you like to bring the heading a little lower? Then type padding top equal to 50 pixels, for example. And as you can tell, the container got more bigger because padding also expands the size of the parent element content area. Now, I give the second parent element a margin top equal to 20 pixels. With margin, we do not create a space inside the element. Create spacing around the outside of the element. It does not move the parent element itself. Instead, it creates spaces around the parent element, pushing the neighbor elements away. I can push the third container using the second container with a margin. If I give the second container a margin button equal to 50 pixels, for example. So, in a nutshell, I use the universal selector to select and style all the elements with a margin and padding with value equal to 0, so I can simply remove the default spacing. The default spacing I showed you before. And if I give the div element a margin equal to 20 pixels, I'm overriding the default margin value for that particular element. Let's go back to our wireframe. I can turn this wireframe to a website page using a div and some CSS styles. But our website made only of divs. Is div the only HTML element that functions as a parent element? Each box of these boxes describes something in this interface, and there are many elements. Works as a parent element, and it's better and it's more fun to use an element that represents what we want to build. They call HTML semantic elements. But before we talk about HTML semantic elements, let's talk about HTML non-semantic elements, div and span. These two are not semantic elements, which means these two, they don't have any meaningful content, and there is a big difference between them. Div is a block element, and the span is a line element, and there is a In CSS, we have a property called the display property. It's responsible for how our elements, how they are displayed, and it has many values. But let's just focus on the inline and the block values for now. I have an example. I set the 3 divs and the 3 spans with the same content inside them, but with different background color. And if I save, I can tell that block level element, in our case is div, it breaks into a new line. However, with inline element, span in our case, the element does not start a new line. Another example, the block elements take the whole width of the page, but the align elements take the width of the content inside it. Their dimensions are determined by the content they contain. And when it comes to margin, inline elements only applies the margin left and the margin right, but it doesn't affect it by margin top and margin bottom. On the other hand, block elements applies all of them, top, right, bottom, left. Divs has a display property with the block element value, and span has a display property with a line value by default. This is not an exclusive properties for div and span. Every HTML element has its own display properties, and most of them have a block or inline element as a default value, and we can change it if we want to. There is something to be aware of. The inline element cannot contain the block element, but block elements are able to contain inline elements. So, if I want to display the block element on the same line without the line breaks, there are many solutions. One of them is to change the display properties of the block elements, for example headings, from block to inline block. That's one of the solutions. Now, in our final chapter, in our final destination, the end of this video is drawing near, and I have a weird feeling that I was waffling around and I need to do something about it. I'm going to turn this wireframe into a website using all the forbidden techniques I told you. What about the semantic elements? Okay, sometimes we don't need to understand everything. Okay, look, if I were to explain each one now, this video will never end. And I personally believe that not all the web developers are knowledgeable about all the semantic elements. I already talked about the concept of the semantic elements before, and the HTML definition. HTML elements are the components that describe our website structure in the HTML page. Sometimes you can understand the meaning of this element from its name without overthinking. For example, article elements. It can be a newspaper article or a forum post. The header is not necessary to come only at the top of the page, but it's a container for an introductory content. Also came at the top of the other elements. For example, an article. Audio, from its name representing an audio. Section, it represented a part of a website. Nav, an observation for the word navigation, defines the navigation bar section. Footer, most of the time it comes at the bottom of the page. It contains these copyright stuff and website creator social media. A table, it represents a table. A form, it represents a form. And many other semantic elements. I can't cover them all in one video. So, what are the benefits of using them? I hope my expression is accurate, but you know when you watch a YouTube tutorials on how to start a YouTube channel, and the YouTuber told you to include the relevant keywords in your video description so YouTube can suggest your video to a wider audience. You can consider the semantic elements as the keywords that enable the search engine to recommend the website to the largest number of people. This is the primary objective when you're creating a website after all. It also might help the impaired users to use your website. To be honest, I don't know. And also, if you work with a team, it will be helpful for them to understand your code. First thing first, I will create a new folder. Then I will go to Visual Studio and create HTML file inside that new folder. Then I will create a CSS file inside that new folder. The same way, instead of writing .html, I will write .css. Then I will press the exclamation mark, then I will press enter. And that's the result. In the wireframe, I have 3 parent elements, right? So, in the HTML file, I will set 3 elements as a parent element. Header, section, footer. Inside the head element, I will include the link element. We use it to link the HTML file to the CSS file. Within the href attribute, I input the name of the previous CSS page I made before. The first parent element, the header, contains an input field, combined by a button. Within the header, I will set an input element with a class attribute with the name of search bar and a button with a class attribute name of submit button. Between the 2 tags of the button element, I will type the word submit. The second parent element, section, contains an image and a button. So inside the section, I will set an image element with the source attribute. Inside the source attribute, I will specify the path of the image I saved on my laptop. And I will set a button element with the class attribute change button. The third parent element, footer, contains 4 icons. One of the ways to set icons is using a website with the name of FontAwesome. To do that, first we need to type FontAwesome CDN, and inside the website I will copy the first link tag and paste it in the HTML head. Then I will go to FontAwesome and download the icons I want, for example the Facebook icon. Then I will copy its code by pressing on it and paste it inside the footer. The same way with the other 3 icons. Okay, in CSS file, I'm going to use the universal selector and remove the default spacing as I did before. Commencing with header, I'm gonna set its height with 50 pixels and the background color with a green-yellow color. The appearance of the input and the button is uncomfortable to the eye. Maybe I should just create a spacing within the element from the top and the bottom by editing padding in the top and the bottom. Remember when I told you that you can manipulate the borders? I will do that with this input field using border radius property. It rounds the element borders. Then I'm going to change its height and its width. The same way with button, but with different size ranging. And with that, I finished styling the first parent element. Let's go to the second, which is section. I'm gonna give it a bigger height this time, with 50-100 pixels and a white background color. The section has 2 child elements, an image and a button. I will change the height of the image and also give it a padding top. The image element is attached to the bottom element. I want to separate the bottom element from the image element. So I'm gonna give the image element a margin right with a value equal to 200 pixels. And with the button element, I'm gonna change its width, its height, its border radius, and its background color, and the color of the word inside the bottom using the property color to the black color. Now, the last part, the third parent element, footer. Just like the heading, I took the same properties and changed the size ranging. And with the icons, I'm gonna give them a black color and change their size to 20 pixels using the font size. The icons are positioned alongside, so I'm gonna create spacing between them on the left side using a margin left equal to 80 pixels. Okay, how to center everything. Here's my genius. Inside the HTML file, I'm going to put all the elements within a div. Then I'm gonna give it a class attribute with the name container. Then in CSS, I'm going to type dot, then container, and I give it a property text align equal to center. And with that, all the elements are centered on the page. This property specifies the horizontal alignment. And it's finally done! I'm sure I will feel empty after this video, but it was a wonderful experience. Hold it! There is something in this interface. It's not nice looking. There is no energy. It's not perfect. Gorgeous.